Hi guys, thank you for joining me today as ever. Oh, today's case is one that really does make you question humanity on every single level. There is just something about people who treat life as something so unvaluable and regard their own lives as so powerfully important that it culminates in the most catastrophic events. And the egocentricity of the two men involved in this case is blindsiding. I promise it's going to make you feel rageful, particularly because the victim that we're going to be talking about today is 71 years of age. 71. A lady who was in the winter of her life and should have been able to live that life out very well. She'd worked very hard, and the consequence of that should have meant that she could have had a relatively nice retirement onwards to her ultimate final breath, hopefully a couple of decades down the line. But that doesn't happen because, of course, it doesn't matter where we are in this world, there are predators everywhere, and Louise Kam unfortunately met them. Also, if you're new to my channel, I release my content twice a week. Also, I've got content behind my paywall on Patreon and YouTube membership. You guys are the reason that I can actually make this content. So if you do want more and you like what you see here, you can always subscribe. On top of that, you should like my content because apparently that really helps with the algorithm. So if you don't mind just giving me a like I said, get your subscriptions on, get your notifications on, and then you will never miss an episode. Let's talk about Louise Kam, who is the victim in this case. Well, first of all, like I said, she's 71 years of age. She should be able, at this moment in time, to think about relaxing, unwinding, thinking about her future that she'd worked very hard to provide for in a really positive way. She's from Potter's Bar in Hertfordshire. She had two sons who she absolutely adored, Richard and Gregory. She was completely devoted to them. And to some degree, one of the main reasons that she finds herself in such a challenging situation that we're going to explore shortly is because of her devotion to her kids. She wants to provide them with a positive future. And let's all be honest, we live in a capitalist society in the UK. Materialism is a part and parcel of our survival. Let's be clear, if you don't have money in the UK, life is incredibly challenging. So if you can give your children, because you have created success for yourself, a more easy experience than you may personally have had, you're going to want to do that, particularly when you're 71 years of age. She'd actually initially made money because she started a catering business with her ex-husband, and then she'd done what incredibly sensible people do, and she'd invested in property. And let's be real, if you got into the property game relatively early, you can make an absolute fortune. And she actually owned two houses in North London, and that meant that she had literally a multi-million-pound property portfolio. So she had a £1.3 million house on Gallants Road in Barnet. That was actually vacant at the time that this case takes place. And she also had a shop with 3 flats in Willesden. So we're talking about millions of pounds worth of property. Understandably, if you don't come from the UK, you might think just having a few properties wouldn't amount to going on £5 million. But actually, if you have properties in London, that is very easy to achieve because the cost of a home in London is astronomical. I can afford a small garage there. It's as simple as that. Not even a garage with a door, I would imagine. Now, in 2021, a friend of Louise introduces her to a man called Kusai Al-Jundi from Harrow. He's born 10th of the 1st, 1998, so obviously considerably younger than she is. And she's introduced to him because it's believed that he's a property developer. He's got a lot of backing, apparently. He's got a lot of money. Now, in reality, this guy is a complete con artist. Al-Jundi worked as a kebab chef at the Yasmin Sham restaurant in Willesden. He was actually living with his mother. So he is portraying to be this incredibly successful property developer, but actually he's just making you kebabs after you've had a pretty heavy night out. And there is nothing wrong with having a job in a kebab shop. Let's be clear, it can make your evening very, very nice at the end of it when you're going home from a club. What I'm saying is, that's not who he's suggesting he is. He's wearing a mask of being this incredible success whilst, like I said, working in a kebab shop and living with his mum. And also, just bear in mind, he's living with his wife and children. This is at 16 Wood End Road in Harrow. Now, the second man who's key to this case is Mohamed El-Abboud. He was born on the 27th of the 10th, 1994. Again, considerably younger. He also comes from Barnet. He's actually 26 years at the time that this case plays out, and he's Romanian. He was also in the country illegally, so he shouldn't be here. And I find it so deeply frustrating and annoying when we cover crimes of people who should not be in the country. There is a legal process to get to the UK. It's surprisingly not too complicated and challenging because we like to invite people from other countries to the UK because we have an aging population and it can be really helpful to have people who want to come over and work. So arguably, the very fact that he's not gone through those legal processes makes me be concerned about who he is as a human being. Now, he'd previously worked in Coventry and he'd worked at a Disney warehouse, and then he came down to London, and at this point he's starting to work cash in hand essentially as a delivery driver. This is also where he meets Al-Jundi because he's a delivery driver at the same restaurant where he's a chef. Now, Al-Jundi spends months genuinely befriending Louise after he's introduced to her, pretending he's this really high-ranking property developer and somebody who potentially has opportunities for Louise. But what's actually happening is he and El-Abboud are thinking about how they can exploit Louise. So Al-Jundi is forging and forming this friendship and relationship with Louise Kam, who believes he has her best interests at heart. But all the while, Al-Jundi and El-Abboud are putting their heads together and thinking about how they can exploit her. Now, they are effective at this. Al-Jundi literally convinces Louise that he is indeed this really wealthy businessman. He also tries to back that up by talking about this very wealthy girlfriend that he's got, who is willing to put up 4.6 million to buy Louise's properties in a deal that firstly would apparently pay Louise well above the market value for the properties and also would avoid paying tax. Now, you know when they say, if something sounds too good to be true, it's likely because it's simply not true. When somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to pay way above market value and also you're not going to have to pay tax, to some degree we would hope it would ring alarm bells. But let's be clear, the very wealthy often know ways to exploit the loopholes where HMRC are concerned. So it does not mean that there are not possibilities where individuals can walk into your life and offer you a deal that seems amazing, but actually it's just that they're very efficient at knowing how to manage their affairs and to reduce your issues with tax whilst also seeming to pay more when it comes down to market value of properties, but there will be a reason behind that because of the money that may be trying to offset from other companies that they might have. So what I'm saying is in the UK, very often in Manchester where I live, the Chinese will come and they're brought over from China literally in coach tours and they go and look at brand new properties and they often pay 30% higher than people who are in Manchester itself living there. And they do that because of the rental property and because obviously they're doing very well when they're very rich in China. And that seems to be something that has applied to property in lots of places. It's the same in London. It's also why London is so unbelievably expensive per square footage. So even though to mere mortals like you or I, we'd be thinking, oh, come on, who's going to come in and pay so much more than my property is worth? And also, they're going to make it so that I don't have to worry about paying capital gains and tax to HMRC. That is something that most of us would probably think it feels a little bit dodgy. But like I said, if you come from the business world and you've dealt with a lot of money, you do hear of people getting incredible breaks because, like I said, it works to offset other money from other businesses that those individuals might want to move into property, for example, because it reduces things elsewhere. So I think that Louise Kam is probably considering this is the golden goose. This is literally an opportunity where she can genuinely think about getting rid of her properties, making a small fortune, and of course doing what she's absolutely devoted to doing, which is looking after her children. Now, this apparent wealthy girlfriend was in fact a woman called Anna Reich. So Anna had actually met Al-Jundi in the kebab shop. That's where they connected for the first time. So she will have been aware that he probably isn't some great big property developer, but he'll be selling her a ton of lies as well. And I would say, looking at what happened to her, it was definitely a romance scam. So Al-Jundi wooed her, basically convinced her that he was absolutely in love with her. And then he ends up making a deal with Anna where she'd sell 2 cars to Al-Jundi and he'd give her £57,000. Now Anna goes ahead and gives him the cars, and then guess what? No money is ever exchanged. Now, a lot of people think, how on earth could anybody be duped into believing that a guy who works behind a counter in a kebab shop can afford to buy 2 cars worth £57,000? But you know what? We build our lives on trust. Think about all the micro trust experiences that we have day to day. You don't walk down the road, have a conversation with a stranger and think, wow, this person's probably going to kill me. You just believe that if they are walking down the road that you're walking down, the chances are they'll be okay. When you're introduced to new friends, you don't sit there thinking, I probably need to be concerned because this person could be a romance scammer. You just take it on trust. And so when Anna meets this guy who's incredibly charming, who's relatively attractive, who gives her special time, who makes her feel good about herself, and convinces her that firstly, he does have the money, and secondly, he will give her the money, even though she is this incredibly intelligent woman, even though she's incredibly savvy, as Louise Kam was, the charm works on her. Now, obviously, the case that we're talking about where Louise Kam is concerned, it isn't a romance fraud case, but certainly it demonstrates how Al-Jundi operates. He is who he needs to be to the people that he's trying to exploit. With Anna, he's the lover, and he gets the cars and gives her no money. With Louise, he's the property developer who's going to change her life for the better. So he's effective at lying very, very well so that people fully believe in him. Now, like I said, with Anna, it turns out he'd done a very similar thing. He had charmed her after meeting her in person. He'd told her all about what he was going to do for her. He'd then used all of his charm. And Anna said on reflection, after all of this plays out and she realises that she had been a victim in a different way, as Louise Kam had, she described Al-Jundi as something of a Walter Mitty. So he's basically lying about everything and anything. When we talk about Walter Mitty, we mean somebody who just makes things up for the sake of making things up and tends to play big. So they won't really have anything going on in their life, but they'll tell you that all these amazing things. That's where the term Walter Mitty comes from. And it minimises what we're really talking about, because most of us refer to a Walter Mitty as somebody who pretends that they have and doesn't actually come through with anything because they haven't got the money, they haven't got the capacity, they haven't got the job, and essentially they just look a bit of a fool. Where Al-Jundi is concerned, that's not the case. He is not a Walter Mitty. He is, as far as I'm concerned, a psychopathic liar of the highest level. And the thing about con artists is they often score high on the psychopathy scale. It's as simple as that. Now, bear in mind, Louise is sitting back at 71 years of age, not aware of what's gone on in the background where Al-Jundi is concerned, not aware that he works in a kebab shop. She is thinking to herself, oh my God, maybe, just maybe, this golden opportunity is going to be able to change my life. I'm going to be able to look after my kids, give them new opportunities and horizons because of the freed up cash it's going to present them with. I'm going to be able to take it easy as I grow older, maybe have beautiful holidays, spend time with friends and family. All of those things, fantasy-wise, are going to be going around her mind. And of course they are. It makes perfect sense. We would all be the same. So what appears to be this amazing opportunity for Louise is literally a sham. Al-Jundi never intends to pay a penny to her at all. In fact, I would say one of the things that Al-Jundi is very adept at is picking his particular victims very, very effectively. Now, in this case, he goes for an elderly woman. He chooses someone who is a woman of absolutely substantial means. She's been very successful. Also, she is somebody who is in a family position wanting to be able to look after her sons and her dependents. So that's a real motivator for her. So Al-Jundi chooses her because he feels that firstly, she has a desire, there's an intention there. To some degree, there's a level of urgency. She'd really like this deal done so she can move on with her life. And that means that she is open and vulnerable to manipulation. Now, he makes sure that he's coming across as this really likable, really trustworthy individual. And he is a good actor. You've got to give him that. He played a role really effectively. He managed to give himself this backstory so that it kind of made sense. And then he essentially manages to persuade this businesswoman who is certainly not a naive human being, that he's somebody who can help her financially. Bear in mind, she's a property portfolio holder, she's a businesswoman, and yet in spite of her intelligence, her acumen for business, her experience historically, she is still utterly convinced by this absolute con artist. Now, on the 24th of July 2021, one of the things that Al-Jundi says to his mother, who he's living with, is that Louise Kam is dying of cancer. He also tells his mother that this Louise Kam has left him her house in Gallants Farm Road, and also that she's left him lots of assets in a will. Now, I cannot judge the mother, and I don't know what went on in this situation, but you bet your bottom dollar, if my son walked in and said to me, "Hey mum, this old lady," at least compared to him, when you're 22, which my son is, 71, feels like you're dead. I'm already dead as far as most young people are concerned. We know that, right? So if you were a mother of a younger man and they're coming in and saying, this relatively elderly woman has literally left a property to me and loads of her assets, I'm going to be like, what the hell have you been doing? Because you know what? If my child has had time to actually get into a relationship with somebody to such a degree that this person is going to invest what she has earned in her life into his life once she has died, this is going to have to make sense. Now, we would understand that if he had been knowingly spending great amounts of time with somebody that he was supporting, going out of his way for her, introducing her to the family, so that obviously there is some kind of engagement there on a wider level, I would get it as a parent. I'd be like, oh, well, that's really lovely. I would also have a range of questions, like, does she have any kids? Because you bet your bottom dollar, if she's got kids, there's going to be some kind of legal fight if he's just been handed a property and loads of her assets. I would be asking those questions deeply. And I'm not saying that that didn't happen, but I don't believe it did from what I understand. And I do think that is a very big issue in that relationship, because the mother should not have been thinking, oh, let's rub our hands together in glee that this has occurred and how great my son's going to inherit this ridiculous amount of money. She should have been suspicious beyond measure because it just doesn't make sense. But again, what's he doing? He's convincing his mother, oh, there is this time frame where all of a sudden I'm going to inherit this huge amount of money, so just be prepared when that happens. Now, it was believed that at the time that all this is going on, the Gallants Farm Road was actually a vacant property. But in July 2021, Al-Jundi literally gets the keys off Louise and moves El-Abboud in. So the arrogance of this man is astonishing. He's not just convinced Louise that he's going to change her life for the better. He's now managed to convince her to give the keys over to him. And she probably believes that he's going to be showing people around, etc. But that isn't the case. He's just simply creating an opportunity for El-Abboud to get in there. Now, we don't know exactly what Louise was told in order to persuade her to hand over the keys, but it would make sense that she just believed this is a business opportunity and he's going to need access so that she can have those opportunities provided when he brings new people around to look, or his partner that's apparently this really wealthy person who's going to buy them, and so on and so forth. So she's being hoodwinked into doing this. Also, it could just be that maybe they said, well, we need to get surveys done, or there needs to be some work done on the property, and basically it's going to save you a lot of time by just giving me the keys, because then I can be efficient in sorting these things out. So she gives them to him, probably thinking he's just going to come and go, not knowing that actually El-Abboud is moving in. Now, I would say, even though Al-Jundi is a very good con artist, he's not very effective at being sophisticated in other ways, because bear in mind, moving El-Abboud into the property is going to be an issue, particularly when El-Abboud starts recording TikTok videos there. Not under the radar, shall we say, when you are literally videoing yourself and then putting it out there on social media. Now, in one of the videos, he actually says, God, what a life some people have. Car, house, luxury interior. Fortunately, I'm a handsome boy around here. Like that, kitchen as big as a house. This is what's called a salon, or whatever it's called in Romanian. And the truth is, there's no money in my pocket. This is how rich people live. Rich people live with luxuries and no money in their pocket.
Doamne, ce viață au buni. Mașină. Casă. Interior lux. Din fericire. O frumusețe de băiat pe aici. Așa. Bucătărie cât casă. Asta cum se numește salonul sau cum se spune în limba română, așa. Și adevărul e că nu e bani în buzunar. Așa că trăiesc bogați. Bogați cu luxuri și fără bani în buzunar. Haide o zi bună.
Again, I'm only telling you what he said. It doesn't make entire sense, but there again, there is a bit of a language barrier. But I think we can all understand that what he's saying there is a lot of people who appear rich don't necessarily have cash in their pockets because they've spent it all on their big properties. Also, he's suggesting that his looks are getting him to certain places. So again, massively arrogant and also unbelievably stupid. He's literally videoing himself on a property that he isn't even allowed to be in. He probably thought at this moment in time, I've landed on my feet. I'm living in this really nice property. Obviously, it's going to be rent-free for the most part. But it turns out that this has built a relationship with Al-Jundi where this man feels that he owes him quite a lot. In fact, he feels quite reliant on him. I would imagine that if you've also been given a property now to live in, that would make sense. So he feels relatively tied to Al-Jundi. Now, in the TikTok videos, El-Abboud is also showing off with the cars, with the clothes, with the money, with the house, but he's also showing off with a fellow Romanian girl named Maria Amaraci. Now, they had met in Coventry, and after she got to know him, although I doubt very much she knew him at all, she had actually come down to London. Maria believed that she was in a relationship with Al-Jundi. I would also say in the TikTok videos, there's also a lot of physical contact between Maria and El-Abboud, but essentially she obviously has a closeness to the both of them at this point. And Al-Jundi actually told Maria he loves her, which obviously would be music to somebody's ear if you're in a relationship with somebody and you want to be their partner. What she didn't know, however, was he already had a wife and children. So not exactly the perfect guy. And she is completely unaware of any of that. So she is also being conned. Now, there is a particular TikTok video that's really poignant. I would say maybe even prophetic. And this is where El-Abboud has actually got his hands around his own throat. That will make sense shortly. And it was as if he's being choked at the time. Now, whilst all this is going on in the background and Louise is completely unaware of it, Al-Jundi is also wheedling his way into solicitors, asking them to draw up legal papers to transfer Louise's properties into his name. He actually got her to sign a TL1 form, which is a lasting power of attorney document. And the reason he wanted to do that is he wanted to seize control of the finances. Now, in the UK, a power of attorney tends to be done if somebody is not necessarily in charge of their faculties how you would wish for them to be. It's not always the case. You can give power of attorney to people when you are completely okay and you're cognitively in a great place. But for example, you have an elderly parent, maybe they start spending in places and spaces because they're maybe entertaining some dementia, or there are issues about vulnerability and you're worried about them being exploited and you take over ensuring that they can have access to their money but that you are overseeing it. That would be an example. Also, if somebody goes into a care home and doesn't necessarily have family and is struggling again to be compos mentis, that will often happen. The care home will take responsibility for it. So power of attorney is a really serious thing, and it means that somebody else is making decisions over your finances as opposed to you. And bear in mind, none of that would make sense because she already has children. So if anybody's going to take over power of attorney, it would be one of those. You would automatically go for somebody who is very trusted to you, and her children would be the immediate people that you'd refer that to. So this document, like I said, would mean that he would have power over her finances, and his idea was then he would basically sell the properties. He would essentially, as far as she was concerned, give Louise a big lump sum of cash. So this is her mindset. But clearly his mindset is very different. He's thinking, once I've got this signed over, I'm going to be able to sell the properties. She's not going to have any power over it because I'll have got the power over her and there's nothing she'll be able to do. He'll have got the money. But like I said, she's seeing this from a far different perspective because she's a trusting human being. She believes that he is going to do what is right for her, and he is simply finding a way around these murky issues where HMRC is concerned, and that he's going to provide her with a much bigger lump sum because he has got his contacts and he knows what he's doing, and this is part of the process to achieve that. Now, over the course of attempting to actually push this transaction through with Louise, Al-Jundi is speaking to lots of different solicitors because he wants this preparation of the paperwork sorted out, and he wants the transfer of the properties from her to him. Now, understandably, lots of the solicitors he went to just said no. They felt there was something fishy going on. They felt that this wasn't normal protocol, so they refused to go through with it. And Al-Jundi was actually told that Louise Kam, if this was going to happen at all, would need to have her own solicitor because there's a conflict of interests if he's the one organising it and he's the one benefiting to some degree by getting control of her finances. So they need an independent party to look after Louise to make sure that she isn't being conned. Now, somehow, in spite of this, Al-Jundi persuades Louise not only to get her own solicitor, but to pay for her own solicitor to literally draw out the contracts to allow Al-Jundi to take her property from her. Now, I cannot quite understand how any solicitor with, I don't know, maybe a week's training would go ahead and agree to draw those papers up, because you're dealing with a 71-year-old woman who is about to give control of all her property and money essentially to a man that she's known for a very short period of time, and that she's going to pay for the benefit of doing that. So essentially, Al-Jundi is going to benefit on every single level. That is going to raise massive alarms with anyone who's worth their salt legally. But at the same time, Al-Jundi has a manipulation level that means that he's thought this out to some degree, and he's quite clever because if you can find a solicitor who isn't as judicious, and it seems that she's the one saying, well, I want this to happen, and she seems in control of her faculties, you might have questions, but essentially you may well go through with it because why would anybody actually do something that's going to cost them so greatly? Therefore, blinding the solicitor to believe that there must be a good reason for it. Now, one of the things that had happened is that Louise's bank ultimately refused to make further transactions to Al-Jundi. They actually had suspected fraud. They felt there was dishonesty that was happening, and they were really concerned about what was occurring. So he ended up getting Louise to lie to her bank and mortgage provider so that he could essentially further profit from her. So to go and speak to them and to say everything is okay, and she went ahead and did this. Now, at this point in the video, I do appreciate that some of you will be screaming, why is she going ahead and doing this? Why is she not thinking about how bizarre this sounds? Well, it's the same when we see romance scammers, where people literally sell their homes believing that they're about to go and join another person in another country who's going to make all their dreams come true, and they send all their money there, and of course they end up with nothing. It's not because the person was stupid. They are blinded, they are blinkered, they are bought into a belief that it will all be okay in the end. And the idea that you have been hoodwinked in such a horrible way is so challenging to digest that very often people will think it will all be okay because he said it's going to be okay. And they're so convincing when they're talking to me. They seem to know so much about this, and they are why those building blocks of denial are so powerful in these situations. Now, there have been reports that Louise did actually start to get cold feet and wanted to pull out of the deal, and did actually have a conversation with both Al-Abboud and Al-Jundi that she didn't want to go through with the deal and that she wouldn't sign over her properties to them. And on the 26th of July, at 3:02 p.m, Louise had actually spoken to her really close friend, her best friend really, Kami Rahani, on the phone. And this is when it turns out that in spite of having some conversations about closing down the deal, suddenly she is going to go to Gallant's Farm Road and she's going to have this meeting with Al-Jundi, also with a solicitor and apparently this mysterious backer, Anna. Now, it turns out that Al-Jundi had also tried to convince Anna Reich to attend this meeting, but she'd refused. I wonder why? Al-Jundi? Hi, Anna. Yeah? Can you come to this meeting? No? Why? You owe me £57,000 for 2 cars, that's why. you know? But this again demonstrates the enormous brass balls of this deviant human being, because he has absolutely no morals. He literally gets onto the person he's romance scammed and tries to get her to get involved in this con. Now, you can understand, Louise has got cold feet, but then all of a sudden, he's calling her and saying, listen, I've got this meeting, solicitor's going to be there, I'm going to be there, this rich woman's going to be there, and so on and so forth. Louise Kam is probably going to have suddenly thought, oh my God, it is going to be okay. Maybe if I go, this will all get resolved, this will all get sorted, and that payday that I've been hoping and praying for, it's going to come. So that will likely be the motivation as to why she went there. Now, the last sighting of Louise Kam was actually by family members near the Spires shopping centre in Barnet. It was around 12:30 p.m. on Monday the 26th of July 2021. On this day, Louise drove from Boreham Wood in Hertfordshire to her property on Gallants Farm Road in Barnet. Now, her family and her friends, they'd all advised her, they'd warned her not to go. People didn't trust what was playing out, and they genuinely did not want her involved with any of this process regarding the property. They were very, very concerned. But in spite of this, it seems like she mistakenly believed that it was all going to be above board. So Louise innocently turns up at the house, probably a little bit excited, probably with some trepidation about what's going to happen, but understandably, she has trusted Al-Jundi. She has believed that hopefully she's going to have this great payday and be able to really give her children something amazing. So there'll be nerves, but there'll also be a sense of potential elation and excitement that this is actually happening. When she arrives at the house, her house, she finds El-Abboud there, and then Al-Jundi arrives not long afterwards. After this, Louise wasn't seen again. Now, her family are very close, so it's very quickly that she's reported missing by her sons. Now, the police, once she's reported as missing, do actually find her car on Wednesday the 28th of July in northwest London. It was a black BMW 3 Series convertible, registration number LM11ECJ. So now they're really worried because she's 71. She doesn't just disappear. She doesn't go off by herself. Her family know where she is. She keeps in contact with them constantly. Now, DCI Brian Howie, who's a specialist crime investigator, said, Louise's disappearance is entirely out of character. Her family, in particular her two sons, are extremely worried about her. They also said officers are also becoming increasingly concerned for Louise's safety. It is vital that anyone who knows anything gets in contact with the police or Crime Stoppers as a matter of urgency. It is clear from really early on in this investigation, they have real concerns about her safety. We appreciate that where missing persons are concerned, they are advertised as missing. Often there is a concern about them being unwell. But in this case, I think from the get-go, they were very concerned about whether she was ever going to be returned because it was just so out of character for her to disappear. On the 27th of July 2021, that missing persons inquiry really does begin to escalate. And the reason for that is Louise's son Greg says to the police, listen, I've got a text message from my mum and it's bizarre. It says she's gone to China, but when he looked at the message itself, it was clear it was not from Louise. Louise is an educated, articulate, intelligent businesswoman. And the way the message is spelt and the grammar is used is awful. It is not how she would respond or write. And that's one of the reasons why investigators often look at text messages compared with the ones that have been written prior, because we have a signature in the way that we write. It's just who we are. For example, I put a kiss at the end of every text, even when it's professional, which is probably highly unprofessional, but it's just part of who I am. So consequently, if you were to see messages from me and it didn't have that kiss, there is a strong likelihood you'd be like, that seems a bit strange. Is she really angry with me? That would be one explanation, or is somebody else writing it? Secondly, when we write, some of us will use grammar that is very accurate. Some of you will use grammar like me, which doesn't exist at times because I'm dyslexic. But also, the way that you write will have certain tones, and some people abbreviate, some people don't, and so on and so forth. Now, the text that had been sent from her phone clearly was not written by Louise. So, of course, the police are then thinking to themselves, well, who the hell has written this? And it's so devastating for Greg, because you can imagine, can't you, in that moment, his mother's missing, the car's been found, he's no idea where she is, and then all of a sudden, you see the name pop up on your phone, Mum. And you're like, oh my God, thank God. Thank God Mum's written me a text. It's all going to be okay, because that's the way it works. We know how it feels when someone we love goes AWOL. I'm sure it's happened to each and every one of us. At some point in our life, we have been waiting for a text off somebody that has gone missing, maybe just for an hour, maybe after an argument. And the anxiety and dread that you hoard in those moments is just horrible to manage. Imagine thinking your mother's disappeared, possibly come to great harm. You've had a few days, she's missing, everybody's worried about her, and then you see that name light up and you're just like, maybe she was just injured, maybe she got sick, maybe she needed space to herself, because you know we have thousands of thoughts in seconds, and you look at that phone and by the time you pick it up to open it, you're just feeling that elation. Finally, it's all going to be okay. And then you open it and you realise there is something entirely sinister, because you know without a shadow of a doubt it wasn't written by her. Apparently in that moment, he just had that sinking feeling of dread and just knew that something absolutely horrible had happened. And he said in that moment, he just started to think the absolute worst, that there was a likelihood his mother was never coming home. Now, going back to the day where Louise disappeared, it turns out at 3:13 p.m. of that day, Al-Jundi leaves Gallant Farm Road with Maria. Now, this is because he's trying to create an alibi. He wants to be seen elsewhere when, shall we say, Louise disappears. Now, meanwhile, El-Abboud's left in the house with Louise. It transpired that that feeling of dread that her son had, that fear that he felt that something truly awful had indeed happened to his mother, was entirely correct. Because it turned out, on that day, at the hands of those men, she had been brutally murdered at Gallant's Farm Road. And the way she was murdered was through the cord of a hairdryer used as a ligature to strangle her. One of the things that I'll note is that this 71-year-old woman fought hard for her life. She did not go down easily. Now, on the day of the murder, one of the things that the police were able to track was telephone records, and they show that Al-Jundi and El-Abboud had been having a 22-minute phone conversation, even though they'd only seen each other very shortly before that. It's very likely at that point they were discussing Louise's murder and what had played out, and also thinking about how on earth they're going to cover it up. Shortly afterwards, there's actual CCTV footage of El-Abboud and Al-Jundi going to the kebab shop in Willesden where they both worked, and the reason they were doing that was to collect cleaning fluids. So they're getting themselves ready to do a clean-up on the scene of murder. Now, the CCTV footage shows that both Al-Jundi and El-Abboud were completely arrogant. They had no concerns. They weren't walking along with their heads down. They weren't nervous. They weren't worried. They didn't seem bothered about what they'd just done. They acted normal. They were just going about their day-to-day life, which just demonstrates the callousness that each of these men were capable of. Al-Jundi and El-Abboud went back at this point to the Gallant's Farm Road property, and it's at this point that they wrap Louise's body in a duvet and plastic sheets. And then they take this loving mother, this woman of business acumen, of a really high level and standard, a friend to so many, and they dump her in a wheelie bin. They put her in a plastic makeshift coffin, essentially, as if she's just rubbish, just something that can be thrown away. And to add insult to injury, they then put garden waste on top of her body. Now, on the 27th of July, Al-Jundi then calls three men. Now, bear in mind, these three men don't have any clue as to what's taken place at the Gallant's Farm Road, but he asks these guys to move the wheelie bin, and he wants it moved from 16 Gallant's Farm Road to 16 Wood End Road in Harrow. At this point, it's placed with other wheelie bins, also with the number 16 marked on them, so it won't necessarily make the bin collectors think that it's strange, because it makes sense. And they also have other rubbish because they're in the bins around them, so they feel that that's going to help them cover up what they have done. Nobody's going to be paying attention. Of course, CCTV tends to help with attention because you get to be seen on it doing all the things that you don't wish others to know that you've done. Now, this was their main hope, that the contents of the wheelie bin is going to end up at a local authority rubbish site and the murder that they have committed would not be traced back to them because no body, no crime. I appreciate that circumstantial evidence can be used. I appreciate that there have been people sent to prison when bodies haven't been found, but it's a much more difficult situation for the prosecution to prove. And they are hoping to God the prosecution won't be able to prove anything because they're going to literally get away with murder. Now, a harrowing piece of CCTV was actually captured at night at Al-Jundi's house. So Al-Jundi can be seen on the driveways with his family, and he's also with the bin with Louise's body in it. That's there at the side of the drive. So he's with his family, and they're completely unaware that there is literally a dead body feet from them. And it's as if Al-Jundi can't control himself. He couldn't help himself. So they capture on CCTV him going and having a look at the bin. You have to wonder what was going through his head at that moment in time. Could be that he was starting to get a little bit afraid. It could be that he was deciding to make it more real for himself because obviously he'd engaged in murder and going and looking at the body makes it more real. It could be he's proud of it. He's excited by it. He's thinking to himself, none of these people know that I've killed this woman, I've dumped her body and it's just feet away from you. And now I'm set to inherit a fortune. There is a part of me that thinks it's the latter, that he genuinely is proud. He doesn't have remorse, he doesn't have conscience. He's been acting completely normally. Who can do that when they've murdered a 71-year-old innocent woman? After the two of them had killed Louise, one of the things that they did was they took her mobile phone, they took her bank cards. And we all know why, because mobile phones and bank cards suggest life. It's one of the things that you always look at as an investigating officer. How recently have the bank cards been used? Because if you've gone missing, it shows that potentially you are alive and that you were just taking time away and you have your bank cards with you. And that means there's a level of safety associated with what's happened to you. Mobile phone records can also indicate that somebody is alive because they're using their phone. So they're clever to some degree doing that. And then, of course, as we know, they send messages from her phone, pretending that she's okay, getting in contact with her family and close friends. And it, again, demonstrates a callousness because they're drawing out the pain that they're going to feel by making the family feel, as far as they're concerned in their minds, that Louise is okay when she evidently is not. Actually, all the messages did was draw suspicion to them. But like I said, Al-Jundi and El-Abboud might be good at convincing people of certain elements of who they are and what they're pretending to be, but they're not bright. They're genuinely not bright. But this extends their capacity for harm, deceiving the people who love and care for Louise, deceiving that she's still alive, and making people have a false sense of security. Obviously, it's not effective, but that's what they wanted to do. Now, another thing that happened after the murder is El-Abboud actually took Louise's black BMW and put it on Facebook Marketplace. In fact, it was sold to an unsuspecting buyer for £1,450, which is obviously a very small amount for that car. The person is going to snap their hands off, but also it's going to unfortunately impact on the person who's bought the car because it's stolen goods. So essentially they're not going to be able to keep it. And also it's going to be really incriminating for them when the police find a missing woman's car and you happen to have bought it. But again, El-Abboud doesn't care about that. Now, with that money, he goes and buys new clothes. He then puts his new clothes on and he records himself dancing on the driveway of Gallant's Farm Road after he's murdered Louise. Then he posts them. He takes those videos literally and posts them on TikTok. So again, there's no level of sophistication when it comes down to wanting to get away with this. He's just putting it out there. He's now wearing expensive clothes. He's at the property where this woman has been murdered, and he's putting it out into social media that he has access to a place that essentially he's not entitled to. Now, one of the things that I would say is sad about this case is that when Louise went missing, there wasn't a lot of information in the media about her disappearance, and that's pretty unusual when you consider that she was 71 years of age and it was totally out of character. I would say that when it comes down to missing persons, we're more used to hearing about children going missing because obviously that provokes a real reaction in society. But I think that's a real shame because at 71 years of age, clearly you could think that this person could be injured or could be sick. We really need to hear about cases when individuals like Louise go missing. But essentially, it didn't really get a lot of gravity in the press. Now, at the time of Louise's disappearance, as far as Louise was concerned, bear in mind, the Gallant Farm Road property was empty. So that's what the police are told by family members, because she hasn't got anybody in there. So they're obviously going to check out the places that Louise would have been and potentially been seen last. So they go along to Gallant Farm to have a look. And guess what? When they turn up, they're pretty surprised, because they find out that somebody has been living there. So Al-Abboud has made himself at home. At this point, the son, Greg, is really concerned and says, this should not have happened. This man should not be living there. And now I'm really concerned about what's happened to my mother. And the police are very much on the same page. So they then bring officers to search Louise's house. They then find a sweatshirt at the scene. And guess what? That sweatshirt has got blood on the front of it. They then send it for DNA profiling, and guess what? It matched that of Louise. That means that they know without a shadow of a doubt Louise had been present at some point and the blood had come from her. The sweatshirt's also tested for what's known as wearer's DNA. And the reason for that is they want to establish who the wearer was, and it matched that of, oh, surprising, El-Abboud. Yes. So now they know that he's got DNA that has been involved in the killing, or at least in the bleeding at this point of Louise. They also search the garden, and there they find a piece of discarded electrical cable, and the police also find a hairdryer in the house that was missing an electrical cable. So now they're thinking, why? Why would a hairdryer cable be in the garden? I mean, it's really unusual that a hairdryer cable would come away from the hairdryer itself. I mean, it takes a really big amount of force. So they test it. And the cord from the hairdryer was subjected to DNA analysis, and a DNA profile was obtained. And guess what? It matched that of El-Abboud. Now, the police at this point are able to also connect El-Abboud with Al-Jundi. And on the 1st of August 2021, they begin a search of Al-Jundi's house. And guess what they find here? The wheelie bin containing Louise's body. So when Al-Jundi and El-Abboud had placed Louise in the wheelie bin, they'd actually covered her with garden waste. They'd also put on top of the garden waste 2 pairs of disposable gloves. Blood was found on the outside of these gloves, and the DNA profile matched that to Louise. They found that they'd come from her injuries that she'd sustained in the attack. And guess what? On the inside of the gloves, they found the wearer's DNA. And guess who that matched? Al-Jundi and El-Abboud. Bang to rights. In America, you'll say dead to rights. But these guys are guilty as hell. And there is something that pleases me about the fact that the police were actually able to find her body in that direct, connected way. Because they genuinely thought they could dump her like rubbish and they'd get away with it. And yet here they are, literally caught red-handed, and in this case, caught disposable glove-handed. Now, the post-mortem was horrific because the examination showed that Louise fought hard. There would have been a really violent struggle when she was attacked. The cord of the hairdryer was obviously used as a ligature to strangle her. And the thing about a cord like that is you're not going to be able to do anything about it because it's not going to break. It's going to be very, very powerful to be used as a ligature in that way. They also noted other injuries on her body, and they believe that she was killed within some 30 to 40 seconds of the attack starting. And they know that the ligature was the main thing. It was actually found that Louise's strangulation with the ligature was the major cause of death, but she also had other injuries to her body. So there was an indication of a spinal fracture. There was also bruising to her body, and it was also suggested that there was a blunt object injury to the body. So this 71-year-old woman who's going to be far more frail than these young men. Let's be real, men are stronger than women. I know in this day and age, no one wants to talk about that, but it's so true. In fact, a slight man will be able to overpower me. It's just the way that they're built. We're not trying to offend people by acknowledging that gender difference. And of course, there are examples of women who are super strong, and there are examples of men who are super weak, but not for the most part. So if a guy overpowers you, it's going to be really hard to fight back in an equal manner. And there were 2 men who will have been doing this. And the fact that it was 30 to 40 seconds, in some ways you think 30 to 40 seconds isn't a long time, but then remember what it's like to burn yourself or to cut yourself. That lasts for a millisecond and it scares us and it causes us pain. And then imagine that with terror going on for 30 to 40 seconds. And also the other injuries, because she's fighting for her life. It is an incalculably long period of time when you put it into that context. Louise's murder trial ends up taking place at the Old Bailey, very famous court in the UK. Now, this case actually involved what's known as a cutthroat defence. Now, what a cutthroat defence involves is where one defendant blames the other, and the defendant that's being blamed then goes ahead and blames the first one. So they each blame the other. Now, in defence terms, I will say these defences are notoriously difficult to win. And I'll tell you why, it always looks really bad to a jury to have the defendants blaming each other. And add to that, you've got this body of evidence that links those two people together, both before a crime and after a crime. So essentially, that defence isn't very powerful. Because yes, you could say, well, it's a case of he said, she said, but then when you add together all of the other incriminating information and factors, they just look like a couple of massive wrong-uns. And guess what? It's exactly what we want the jury to see. Now, Al-Jundi actually refused to testify in court. I would imagine that makes perfect sense because Al-Jundi would have had a new arsehole ripped by pretty much anyone. In fact, it would have been like, do you want to appear in court, give evidence? No. It's a good idea because we've just done a round robin and basically two of the canteen staff have said that they'd like to cross-examine you and we already know that they'll rip you to pieces, so you should be quiet. It's not going to work out well for you, but you should definitely be quiet. At the end of the day, Al-Jundi shouldn't testify because, let me tell you, it ain't going to work out well for him. Now, from a juror's perspective, not hearing from Al-Jundi in court is to some degree problematic because it means that El-Abboud is going to just be able to levy all the blame towards him. And when he takes a stand, as in El-Abboud takes a stand, he does say, listen, at the end of the day, all of my actions are down to the fact that I was in this awful situation where I was reliant on Al-Jundi. It was all his plan. He did it all. I was scared of him. I just went along with it. I didn't have a choice. He essentially laid all the blame on Al-Jundi. And in El-Abboud's testimony to the court, he said, I came downstairs and saw Louise's body in the living room. I felt scared. I was shocked. I started to cry. I felt a reaction. I do not know how to explain it. Now, the defending barrister asked El-Abboud, did you see the body moving? And El-Abboud's response was, I did not pay attention. I was so shocked. I didn't have time because my phone was ringing. Sorry? Yes, I saw a body that looked like it could be dead. And in that moment, when my whole world shrinks to a situation where I realise that something terrible has played out, and I should be focusing on that because it's deeply traumatic and traumatic things tend to have an impact, but my phone was ringing, so I just thought, well, I could concentrate on that that's completely unfamiliar and completely outlandishly unusual, or I could just answer my phone. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever, but we do like it when somebody tries to create some kind of defence that is ludicrous. Now, the problem for El-Abboud, and in fact, Al-Jundi, is that they have forgotten about Maria. Remember Maria, who was hanging out with Al-Jundi, didn't realise he'd got a marriage and kids going on, but essentially thought she was the girlfriend? Well, she tells the police things that completely contradict what El-Abboud is saying. Now, what Maria actually said was that she and Al-Jundi had left the house, and when they left the house, El-Abboud and Louise Kam were actually still inside. And she said that Louise at this point was still alive. Now, bear in mind, Al-Jundi then went to the jewellers with Maria. That was the alibi he was creating because it would mean that she could testify that, obviously, she was with him. They were elsewhere when the murder played out. But in spite of that, all of the evidence actually pointed towards a joint enterprise case because of the clean-up operation, because of the 22-minute phone call after Louise was murdered, because of the planning beforehand. So this showed that whoever pulled that court, they were still in it together. So it wasn't just one man, no matter which way that you look at it. It couldn't have been a crime that happened on one person's conscience because two of them had been premeditating what they were going to do and then had tried essentially to get away with murder. Now, Maria did play a really important part in this case, because essentially, aside from the forensics, which I think were pretty strong anyway, but aside from that, she's essentially the glue that puts those relationships together, and she was able to give critical information, which made the job easier for the police and the CPS. And I guess to some degree we have to acknowledge her bravery for giving evidence against two men who had literally murdered somebody for financial gain. And also, you could say it was pretty feasible that Al-Jundi and El-Abboud could have been connected with other people, and it's very easy when you are a witness to find yourself being pressured by outside sources and being threatened at times. Now, Maria's evidence was absolutely what persuaded the jury. One of the key bits of information that Maria told the jury was that the day after the murder, El-Abboud actually drove her back to the Coventry. Now, they broke the journey for a meal, and it's during this break that El-Abboud said to Maria, "I can't believe that I just killed somebody." Apparently, at that point, Maria didn't take El-Abboud seriously, but he said that he'd actually grabbed Louise from behind. And bear in mind, that account that Maria gives, that's consistent to the way that Louise was killed. And El-Abboud also said to Maria that Al-Jundi had asked him to kill Louise, as Louise basically owed him £2 million. And Al-Jundi had basically said, if you kill her, I'm going to share the money with you. Now again, that is making somebody kill somebody for financial gain, and if you're the one directing it, you are equally as culpable as the person who has actually carried out the attack. Now, El-Abboud actually claimed to be scared of Al-Jundi and said that one of the reasons for that, he was really dependent upon him for a job and also a place to live. Well, you know what? Find another job, find another place to live. Problem solved. Don't need to move into somebody's house that you have no right to move into. That's your personal choice. It really annoys me when people minimise. We're talking about the murder of this poor 71-year-old woman, this devoted mother, this adored human being, and he thinks that money is a reason to kill. You cannot get more cold and calculating and premeditated and disgusting than being a person who is willing to do that. Now, fortunately, one of the things that the excellent prosecution was able to do was to show the jury the TikTok videos that El-Abboud had made. One of the videos was actually him parodying Louise in her clothes and effectively hobbling to a car. So he's taking the mick out of her. Now, the reason that this is pretty psychologically compelling for the audience regarding who the jury are is because it isn't going to show that there's any evidence there of any specific part of the offence, but it tells you about the psychology and character of El-Abboud. It shows you what a horrible excuse for a human, what a disrespectful individual he is. And that's really helpful because as the prosecution, you want to paint the character as dark of the individual who is on trial. You want to get that conviction, and not just that, you want to get a conviction with the most length that you can possibly arrive at. You want them sent down for a hell of a long time. That's what you feel like when you are prosecuting a case like this. Now, throughout the trial, each defendant actually had the services of an interpreter, so they could essentially make sure they could follow the proceedings in their native language. The cost to the taxpayer of that is insane. I know it has to happen, but it really grates on me. And during the trial, Louise's son Greg actually read out a victim impact statement and said, "Our family has been left in a state of disbelief at what has happened to my mother. I cannot find words that will express the grief I bear. My life without my mother does not have any meaning. I will end my days as a lonely and broken man. Time does not heal. Now and for the rest of our lives, I and all who loved her will live knowing of the brutality she suffered to her last breath, the disregard of her remains when no mercy was had. I hate the idea that he feels like he's going to die a lonely and broken man. That ripple effect of trauma is truly devastating. I hope that in spite of the darkness, there is a thread of light that pierces what he is going through and ultimately illuminates his future, because his mother would wish for that to happen. I have no doubt whatsoever that Louise Kam is looking down and wanting her boys to believe that they deserve a happy life, and that one day the grief that consumes them will one day ebb to a point where they are so used to it they can continue life and learn to smile again. It is heartbreaking. that he feels so utterly hopeless and helpless. In a victim impact statement read to court, Ms. Kam's best friend, Cammy Romany, she said, "Louise loved and cared for so many. Her disabled eldest son has been left without a loving mother. So many miss her too." So we also know that her eldest son had needs, and those needs won't be met in the way that they should have. I appreciate that financially there will be provision because she was such a successful person and the properties were worth a lot of money, but that's not the same as care. It's not the same as having your mother in the winter of their lives spending time with you and sharing time with you. They've had that stolen. On the 19th of January 2023, the jury retired to deliberate. It did take them all day, but let's be clear, it can take weeks for juries to come through with a verdict, so I imagine that most of them must have been decided. And at this point, Al-Jundi and El-Abboud were finally called to hear their verdict. And when it was delivered, they wept, which is ironic because a lot of the court were just thrilled and very, very happy with the result. The only people that they were crying for was themselves. Because let's be clear, neither of these men have a shred of conscience. Now, the reason that they were found guilty, and it is blindsiding that they didn't just admit their guilt and prevent this being drawn out in the way that it was drawn out, because the evidence was literally overwhelming. It may as well have been a dot-to-dot, A-to-Z version of how to find somebody guilty. So they found both El-Abboud and El-Jundi guilty of the murder of Louise, even though they were blaming one another. At the end of the trial, it was right that this is a case of course, and the judge said that the only sentence that could be given was a life sentence. Now, at this stage, the judge always gives a minimum term that has to be served before a defendant's eligible for parole, and in this case, they were each given 35 years minimum. And he made absolutely no distinction between the two men and what part they played in Louise Kam's murder. He just held them equally as responsible. In his sentencing remarks, the Honourable Judge Mark Lucraft, KC, said, "It is clear how much Louise was loved and admired by her family and her friends. A woman who loved and cared for her sons suffered brutal injuries at your hands, and that with complete disregard, you sought to dispose of her remains. I am satisfied that by the 26th July, Al-Jundi, you had resolved to kill Louise Kam. Your plans had crystallised at least a few days before. You plainly told El-Abboud you would make a significant amount of money from Louise Kam's death. El-Abboud, although it might be said that Al-Jundi played the lead role in the long run of defrauding Louise, I draw no distinction on the sentence to be passed on you. The evidence clearly shows that what you did, and did willingly, and that you along with Al-Jundi did what you did out of greed. Al-Jundi, you're age 25. There are no previous convictions recorded against you. El-Abboud, you're 28. There are only minor matters recorded against you, and I propose to ignore those for the purpose of sentence. In my judgment, and taking into account all of the aggravating and mitigating factors that I have identified, the appropriate minimum term here is one of 35 years. I would say that the judge's remarks were incredibly considerate and very careful. There was no mitigation at all. So there was nothing essentially other than them being young that could be a reason why they potentially committed the offence, and they're in the 20s, they're not kids. So that long sentence is 100% correct. It's entirely justifiable. And it's sad to some degree because people in America know that if you had done what I've described today, you would go to prison for the rest of your natural life without parole. It's as simple as that. But these two absolute reprehensible excuses of human beings, they will get to live a life freely. The chances are that they will get paroled at some point, and it will mean that they will be returned to society after 35 years in prison. And the thing is that con artists, violent killers, psychopaths, they get worse in prison. They don't get better. I guess we could say that they'll be in their 50s to 60 years of age at the time of their release, and maybe chronology can reduce criminality to some degree. We do see that. But there is a strong possibility that each of these men, after costing the taxpayer an inordinate amount of money, will come back out and be equally as malevolent and evil as they were arriving at that sentencing. And that's something that is really disconcerting, because predators like that, they rarely change their spots. And the truth is, when they get out, there'll be lots of vulnerable people that they could impact on. And let's be clear, they may not stay in the UK. There are other countries that they could go and reinvent themselves and do horrendous damage. And of course, there's a wife and children involved in this case as well. A woman who will have had no idea of the horror her husband was capable of. Children will have to have reframed their entire experience knowing that their father is a killer. It's just a ripple effect of horror that was so preventable. But the problem with predators is they don't see life in the way I've just described. They don't see life with meaning or compassion. All they see is what they want, and they go out of their way to exploit that on every single level. And this case highlights just how dangerous they are. Those TikTok videos, they're just chilling. And don't they just talk and speak of a modern era where predators are so arrogant, so superior in their beliefs about who they are, that to some degree, they put the nails in their own coffin by showing us their true character from behind that screen. Let me know your thoughts on this case. Louise Kam deserved so much better, and I'm really sorry for her sons and for all those people who knew her. I hope where she is now, she is in bliss. Certainly, I hope her sons believe that one day. See you again next time, guys. Look after yourself and be safe.